All right, well, I think that's good. Why don't we get started? Good evening. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for helping us to envision the future of the R3 district. This meeting of the R3 update is regarding the Moffett Whisman Road neighborhood. Thanks again for coming. First, we'll get some technical details out of the way. Tonight, we have interpretation in Chinese. We do not have interpretation in Spanish. However, interpretation during the presentation in Spanish. However, we do have Spanish speakers. And so if you would like to provide input in Spanish during the breakout sessions, we can accommodate that. So first, I'll take a moment to let our interpreters direct people to the language channels for Chinese and to let people know what Spanish services are available tonight. So Ivy or Eileen, I don't know who's going to be providing that. Go ahead,
Okay.
Eileen.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. 大家晚上好，今天晚上我们的研讨会呢有提供中文的翻译服务。如果您需要收听中文的演示呢，请稍后点击在屏幕下方出现的地球仪图标，然后选择中文来收听今晚的演示部分。谢谢 ，Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Martin, can you let our Spanish folks know what is available tonight?
Sure, thank you, Eric. Hola, buenas noches. En la presentación de hoy no tendremos traducción al español en vivo, pero si necesita ayuda o participar en español, al final en los grupos tendremos un grupo en español. Por favor, levante su mano y la asignaremos al grupo indicado. Gracias.
Great, thank you so much. So please keep yourself muted during the presentation. We will have an opportunity for Q&A afterward. Please use the reaction raise hand tool if you want to ask a question at that time. If you're calling in, you can raise your hand at the end of the presentation using *9 and we'll answer your questions. After the presentation, we'll have group discussions to talk about some key questions. I'd like to take an opportunity to introduce myself and the project team. I'm Eric Anderson. I'm Advanced Planning Manager with the city, and I'm Project Manager for this R3 zoning update project. We're also joined by our consultants, Opticos Design, including Stefan Pellegrini, Tony Perez, Beth Sichan, Russell Toller, and Roger Foreman. And lastly, we have support from other Community Development Department staff, including Philip Brennan, Ellen Yao, Anna Reynoso, and Krisha Familiar. You'll have a chance to meet some of them later on in the evening. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to get input on the R3 zoning update. This project is an action in the Council's strategic roadmap, part of a priority to help create housing options in the city. This meeting is focused on the Moffett-Whisman neighborhood. Future workshops will focus on other neighborhoods. Tonight's workshop will include 3 parts. A presentation overview of where we've been with the project and some options for where we can go. Then we will go into breakout groups to hear from each other and each of you about all your thoughts on each option. And lastly, there will be a report back. The R3 zoning update is only part of the city's interconnected housing programs. In addition, the city is preparing the housing element, which is a state requirement to plan for more housing and to address housing equity. Council direction was to not rely on this R3 zoning update to accommodate those units. A draft of the housing element is under review by the state now, and we expect it to be adopted by the end of the year. We're also preparing a displacement response strategy, which could include affordable unit replacement and tenant relocation requirements, as well as preservation efforts. The displacement response strategy is under review and would apply to the R3 zone with or without this update. Lastly, we're preparing a middle income strategy, which will include an increasing portfolio of moderate income ownership and rental units and homeownership assistance. The R3 update would help support this strategy by creating more middle income units. R3 is one of the city's standard zoning districts and is intended for a broad range of residential development types. It covers much of the city and almost all the neighborhoods with multifamily, row house, and HOA developments. The R3 zone regulates development through standards, which new buildings need to comply with. One of these standards is maximum density, which can vary across the R3 zone depending on the neighborhood. Other standards include a 3-story height limit and limits on floor area ratio, which is the size of buildings compared to the size of the lot, setbacks, and minimum open area. These do not vary across the R3 zone. Recently, almost all development has led to expensive row homes, a few recent examples of which are shown here. It's also important to note that state density bonus applies to R3 today. This could result in buildings more than 3 stories and other waivers of development standards, such as lot coverage or setbacks. So why update the zoning? As I stated earlier, the City Council has a goal to increase housing options in the city, and the R3 zoning update is a key part of that effort. The city is looking into a form-based approach. This means that the standards focus on the form of the building rather than its contents. For example, a building with more small units would be treated the same as a building with fewer large units. This has several benefits. The current framework of densities do not address neighborhood conditions. Through a zoning code update, we can locate higher densities near transit or services and modulate character-defining standards like FAR and setbacks and open area to reflect changes in density. Changes to standards can also help create a broader range of unit types, including more stacked flats, which can be relatively more affordable than row homes and other product types. Lastly, with a form-based approach and by calibrating standards to each other, we can create more flexibility while simultaneously creating more predictability and streamlining the approval process. It also needs to be noted that there is a state law in effect that says that we cannot reduce residential density or increase constraints on density. Some growth can occur, and your input can help inform how much. Before we get too much further, we should define some terms. House scale generally refers to separate buildings along a block, usually up to about 80 feet wide. They can include multiple units and are generally up to about 2 to 3 stories. Block scale refers to buildings that are attached or very close to each other along the full length of a block. So with that out of the way, let's take a quick poll. The purpose of this poll is to get an understanding of the stakeholders at this meeting. This way we can see if we need to target any missed groups later on. So let's start this poll. So there are several questions here. We're just asking if you rent in Moffett Whisman, you own a home in Moffett Whisman, you own property but don't live there, own a different property that's not R3, or if you work or own a business. Okay. It should be just about everybody. So let's end the poll here. And here are the results. We got about 15% renters in the neighborhood, 70% are homeowners in the neighborhood. Good showing there. And a few more people who own property but don't live in the neighborhood. So thank you so much for joining on that poll. Okay, let's go back to the presentation. So let's go into what we've heard so far. This project started back in 2020. We conducted workshops and prepared a development framework that was presented to the Environmental Planning Commission and City Council back in 2021. That framework really looked at maximizing development potential. It looked at characteristics of each site and analyzed how large a building the site could feasibly accommodate. In addition, there was analysis of how many existing units could be replaced at rents or sales prices affordable to those living there today. As a result, the framework presented last year had buildings from 3 up to 6 stories. And upon review, the City Council directed staff to go back out and get more input from the community about this framework. Now, earlier this year, we went out and talked to a few different stakeholder groups, had some informal conversations, and we heard a few key messages about their perceptions of the R3 project. Some wanted more housing, and others were a little more cautious about growth. Some wanted us to plan for growth with precise plans and a general plan update. Heard a lot that people wanted to ensure that infrastructure, parks, and schools can support the city's growth. There was desire for better access to retail, services, and amenities. Desire to build new housing near transit, to really consider mobility and streetscapes in the design of housing, to protect privacy and especially greenery, trees, and landscaping. Some wanted lower parking requirements in order to help facilitate housing projects, and others wanted to minimize neighborhood parking impacts. People wanted to make sure that the city was reflecting all opinions and not hiding the downsides, and of course, to protect people from displacement and rent increases. So in response, we've prepared an alternative that seeks to address what we heard. And there are 5 main points that I'll go over. This slide summarizes the growth framework from 2020 that I talked about. It included these sub-districts ranging from 2 up to 6 stories. The 2-story sub-district focused on areas with small parcels and no 3-story buildings in the vicinity. The 3- and 4-story sub-districts were in areas with a mix of different surrounding building sizes and parcels. The 6-story sub-district was just for the sites with the most development capacity and fewest surrounding 2-story buildings. But as I said, we're taking another look at how sub-districts could be different. Rather than focusing on differences in height, we could focus on differences in scale or character. An alternative framework could have lower intensity districts that would be more house scale and higher intensity districts that could be more block scale. These are some alternative districts. As you can see, these images show how buildings can be more massive, including more width and fewer space between adjacent buildings at the higher sub-districts, without increasing height. Later in the presentation, we will look at a map of where these districts could go. And during your breakout rooms, you can respond to these pictures. Is there anything you like about these buildings or things you don't like? Are there locations where some of these buildings might be appropriate, or even some of the previous frameworks buildings? So we put a lot of thought into transitions of height and scale to existing neighborhoods. These pictures show how smaller building scales, including height, width, and depth, can help big buildings better fit into the community, despite small setbacks and 3- or 4-story to 1- or 2-story transitions. In addition, we've revised the proposed R3 map and eliminated cases where higher intensity subzones would be added adjacent to lower density neighborhoods. The lower intensity subzones could have new standards limiting scale, both facing the street and along internal property lines. In addition, privacy and screening concerns can be addressed through landscaping. A form-based set of standards can help support improved pedestrian connections and streetscapes by encouraging connections to the sidewalk and a comfortable walking environment. Publicly accessible open space can be provided through incentives. If developers are allowed to build the same amount of building through an allowance of an extra floor, new public parks become a win-win where the community can benefit from the additional open space. The R3 zone could also be an opportunity for small neighborhood-serving goods and services, increasing the vibrancy and walkability of the city's neighborhoods. Later on, we will ask you about how you feel about these types of uses in your neighborhood and where they might be appropriate. As I said earlier, the 2020 growth framework essentially maximized development capacity. The new alternative map would focus development capacity increases in strategic locations, resulting in smaller increase to overall development capacity in the R3 zone. In addition, R1 and R2 neighborhoods are only adjacent to R3A or R3B, the lower intensity subzones. At the same time, we're targeting higher intensities to key destinations like transit and services. So for example, on the map on the right, which is the 2022 approach map, you can see how around Moffett Boulevard and downtown, there are R3B zones, while the rest of the area is really limited to R3A. There's the R3B kind of along Whisman Road. That's a particularly large site that can internalize more units and is also closer to the light rail line. On the other hand, the 2020 approach map had more different zones throughout the Moffett-Whisman area. You can see there's a small amount of 6-story areas along Middlefield Road near 85 and around the mobile home park on Moffett Boulevard. In addition, there are the R3C areas close to Whisman and Central, as well as around Moffett and Middlefield. We will be asking you in the breakout rooms to weigh in on these two maps. You can be thinking about whether we should change any of the locations of subzones or any of the previous subzones a good idea anywhere. Where are transitions important? Where would neighborhoods serving commercial? So that summarizes our alternative approach. Tonight, you'll have an opportunity to respond to these ideas. And in your breakout groups, you can discuss these questions, like what do you like in the examples of buildings? What don't you like? Where could they be appropriate? Where should pedestrian and bicycle users be prioritized? Where would you support allowing small neighborhoods serving commercial uses? What do you like better about the 2022 map or the 2020 map? And what other ideas do you have? And in closing, I'd like to make it clear that this is not an all or nothing approach. Form-based principles, neighborhood commercial, and open space can move forward with the 2020 map, and we can use parts of the 2020 framework and parts of the 2022 framework. Lastly, you may have other ideas that we haven't thought of yet. So that really concludes our presentation. Before we go to our breakout groups, happy to take any questions, maybe for the next 8 to 10 minutes. If you're on the phone and you want to ask a question, you can hit *9. If you are just in the normal computer app, you can use the reaction raise hand button.
Great. Okay, so I'll be helping field the questions, and definitely correct me if I say your name wrong. So we'll have Edie first and then Terry after.
Thank you. I was just looking at the 2022 map and wondering, will there be any opportunities for a building as high as 6 stories if the 2022 map was adopted?
So a great question, thank you. So as I said before, density bonus could apply, and there could on occasion be cases where a density bonus project could be, more than the maximum, more than, 4 or 5 stories. It's hard to know exactly what may happen with the density bonus project. But that, of course, could happen today under R3 today. So under the current framework, we would set a base density maximum in the R3A areas at a maximum of 3 stories. In those cases, the density bonus would apply on top of that amount.
Thank you, Edie. So next we'll have Terry, then Cynthia, Albert, and James.
Yes, I'm Terry. I just have a real question. When we get into our breakout sessions, are we going to have larger maps so that we can really see more detailed information? Because It's kind of hard to see them in those small maps.
Absolutely. Yeah, so you'll have maps that you'll be able to zoom in on with your team leaders. They'll be able to describe them in more detail, focus in on them. I also want to say that shortly after this workshop, you'll have more of an opportunity to provide additional comments. We're going to take all of these workshop materials, put them on an interactive website, and you'll be able to, if there's something that you didn't understand or additional comments that you wanted to provide, you'll be able to provide comments that way.
Thank you.
Okay, next is Cynthia.
Hi, this is Cynthia. I just wanted to know what your basis is to conclude that an environmental impact assessment isn't necessary in this case.
Oh, we haven't concluded that at all.
Oh, okay.
We are absolutely planning on doing an environmental impact report, but we would not start that until after we've gotten council confirmation of the growth strategy.
Thank you. Your website has a form that has been uploaded saying, this was not required. So if you can please update your website, that would be very helpful.
Okay. If you want to email me with a link to what you're looking at, please feel free. That would be very, very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll have Albert, James, Karen, and after Karen, we'll have Chuck and Hala. So Albert, you're next. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay. I had a question. There's a couple of really large tracts in this area that are already being built out. For example, 777 West Middlefield, and they're already going up to 5 stories. And that project is probably going to be around for the next 50 years, right? So what is the meaning of calling that an R3 zone when it's already in a, what do they call it, a P zone? I forgot what that's called, but where they can pretty much do whatever they want. I mean, it seems like maybe you should just kind of X out those areas that are, there's no chance those are ever going to be redeveloped within our lifetime.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point. That 777 Millfield is colored in on this map, and that is a typo. That would stay as a P zone. And so I think we'll have to, when we update the maps, we'll have to take that out. But because we are updating the R3 zone, and it does currently apply to a lot of sites, we would need to we need to show how all of those sites would be affected by the R3 zone, because it could affect things like small additions or parking standards or things that could be that could affect the existing buildings on the site.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so we will only be having another 5 or so minutes for questions at this time, but we'll keep having the option to ask questions as we go. So next we'll have James and Karen.
Yeah, I was having trouble following the reasoning, or I didn't catch maybe the reasoning behind the proposal to shift from the sort of proposal for zones that seem to correlate largely with height to zones that correspond to, I honestly can't tell what, if that's lot coverage or something else. Especially since it sounded like some of the comments are about wanting more greenery and open space, which I would have expected to correspond to wanting less lot coverage and more height. Maybe I just wasn't following what the trade-offs were there. Could you elaborate more on that?
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the questions that we have for the community, and I think that's a great comment to bring to your group about those trade-offs. We certainly heard concern about privacy and height, and to the extent that we can add growth capacity without adding height, then certainly coverage would is another option to do so. And then, yeah, so the different scales would potentially have more or less coverage. That's a good observation. Although that's only part of it, I think that kind of breaking up the buildings is another factor that's irrespective of coverage. But I also think that it also represents one of the key points of analysis that we had back when we were doing the the financial analyses for what's really constraining R3 development. And that's that the open area standards are very high in R3 and potentially very constraining on new development. And so by looking at other ways that buildings can be configured on the lot, and using kind of different characteristics of buildings to help them fit in better with the community. This is just a way that we're opening up the conversation for options, and want to hear what you have to say about this other way of looking at it.
Thank you. And we'll have Karen up next.
Yes, hello. I'm curious if the plan is including replacing some of the existing business buildings, commercial buildings on Whisman, Ellis, Fairchild with housing?
So there aren't any commercial buildings in R3. The commercial buildings, the office buildings on Ellis and Whisman and Middlefield are in the East Whisman precise plan. And we actually, about 2 or 3 years ago, we adopted an area plan for that, which is now the guiding document for development in that area. So some of those office buildings might get replaced by residential under that precise plan, but that's a different project. This covers a different district, different geography.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we have time for Chuck and Hala afterwards.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Hey, Eric, I had a question for you. So for your new zone map that you're showing there, for the R3B, I think is what you're calling it, or make sure I'm calling that correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah, R3B. Oh, I'm sorry, R3A. What is the maximum height for that?
So under all three options, we're proposing a 3-story height limit as the base. Of course, density bonus exists. And so, under many circumstances, a developer would be able to build more height than 3 stories just through the process of density bonus. There could also be an option, and we talked about this a little in the presentation, of allowing awards for extra height for things like new parks, providing ground floor commercial, if that's something that the community is interested in seeing. So there could be flexibility on the height for things that the community is interested in seeing.
Could you give me an example of like a maximum height then?
Well, under density bonus, it's very hard to predict. But in general, if somebody is requesting a 50% bonus, which is generally the maximum market rate density bonus that you can get under state law right now, on a 3-story building, that could be up to 5 stories roughly.
Okay, great. Thank you, Eric.
Eric, how much more time do we have for questions?
Well, you said Hala could ask a question, so let's let her ask, and then I think we're going to have to stop. Sorry, Sarah.
Okay. Hello. Good afternoon or good evening. So you mentioned that there were concerns from the public input about areas that did not have precise plan, and we know that the Moffett area has no precise plan, and the residents in the community there are very concerned about that, because increasing density without accounting for infrastructure and community needs will be very difficult to do. Mm-hmm. Would then the city do a precise plan first before applying, any modifications to Moffett area?
So the council has directed staff to have a study session about whether we should pursue a precise plan for Moffett Boulevard corridor. If a precise plan does proceed, it would presumably be for the commercial properties on Moffett Boulevard rather than the residential properties adjacent to Moffett Boulevard. However, certainly if the community wishes to broaden the size of that precise plan, theoretically, that could be something that could be directed by council at that study session.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for your questions.
Well, great. So from there, let's see. So we're going to go into breakout groups. And so you're going to be assigned a random breakout group. So just accept it when you're prompted. If you're interested in a Chinese breakout group, don't just accept it. Please raise your hand and we'll put you into a special group. Martín, do you want to prompt the Spanish speakers?
Sure. Si necesita entrar a un breakout room en español, por favor, no acepte la invitación del breakout room y se le asignará uno en español en unos minutos. Thanks, Eric.
Okay, so Krisha, do you want to put everybody into their groups? And I'll try to deal with any stragglers.
Okay, placing everyone in their groups.
Welcome back, everybody. Heard some great discussions. Again, I really appreciate you all taking your time tonight. Busy nights, lots going on in people's homes, I'm sure. Definitely heard some childcare, trying to wrangle that while you're doing this. So I really, really appreciate you taking the time and the effort to kind of make your voice heard on this. So thank you so much. And I hope you had an excellent time with your group and provide a lot of great input. So right now, I think we're just going to jump into some report backs. We'd love to hear some of the things that you heard from your groups. Maybe from each group, we'll just see who sees, 3 or 4 main ideas from each group. Maybe where there was agreement or disagreement, or just something that came up that was innovative and interesting. So let's start with group 1, which I think, who was group 1? Does anybody remember? Tony,
yeah.
Tony's group.
So Eric, Christine Keller from our group is going to represent the group's thoughts and ideas.
Awesome, thank you.
Hi, good evening. So just to get started on that, our summary would be that we want to maintain and grow small businesses. So we want to support both new and existing small businesses. We'd like to maintain and see more of these on the ground level of developments. So one example we have is bike shops. We've seen those go away in Mountain View, and we think it's important that those come back to help build our bike community here. We also want to see the mature heritage trees maintained in new developments more often, and we want to offer stricter guidelines to developers up front so that they do maintain these in their initial plans. We also have a concern with density bonus in general on top of R3, a concern about privacy when you have different stories next to shorter stories. There's also an interest in transitions between adjacent properties. We also feel that newer developments are not having enough setbacks. That's a concern. We want to see wider sidewalks, particularly wide enough for 2 people to walk past each other, and also have trees along them. So maintaining tree canopies and having new trees added in along these sidewalks and streets. We also have support for the 2022 approach, which appears to accommodate existing neighborhoods. So that's a summary of some of what we went over.
Thank you so much, Christine. That was awesome. Thank you so much, and to your whole group.
Thank you.
How about Russell and Philip's group, number 2?
Yeah, we'll be hearing from Terry.
So Christine and I are going to have a lot of similarities, which is wonderful. Our group liked the 2022 map better. We really felt, in terms of when we looked at the pictures, that we feel like any new building should have a pretty substantial setback so that it does give a more open feel for the building. We also believe that buildings should be stepped so that we do not get any canyons or what I call tunnels, so that it's more open. Also, any new development should really fit into the community. It should look like it is a part of the community. We want an urban forest. We want to see green trees. We want to have the cooling effect of those green trees. We also believe that commercial should be on the first floor wherever it makes sense, so that we can have a walkable, bikeable community and have that sense of neighborhood. Parking is still a concern. So that is, but we really feel that everyone was very strong about having urban forest and some open spaces and not just block buildings one after another. And I think that was it.
Great. Thank you so much, Terry. Appreciate you speaking up for your group, and thanks again to your group for all of your input. How about Roger and Krisha's group?
All right. We'll be hearing from David to summarize our group's findings.
I'm going to try to not go over every single bit. I think the main thing that there was a lot of agreement on, because it was sort of early on, and then also the last thing we talked about was the shape of buildings. Generally, everyone in the group was not wild about the large, flat-sided buildings. There was even some talk about specifically a more modern architectural style was the main thing that was disliked there. There are suggestions in the notes that go into more detail about specific ways to deal with that. Then as for commercial, generally the group was in favor of it. I was the person who brought up the question of parking, and my suggestion was just to try to encourage uses that don't have that no one's going to be driving to, right? That are community focused to sort of ensure that you don't have a parking problem. That was the summary on that. And then I think that just try to not build very high density next to the existing R1 areas is the sort of the question, but the group's response to where density should be. And again, there's more detail on all of those in our notes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. And to your group. How about Martine and Anna's group? I know you guys finished early, but did you have anything you want to report from your group? And I know Albert was in that one, and maybe a few other folks.
Yes.
Sure.
Oh, sorry.
I'll go ahead and give a quick summary. Again, there was a lot of conversation of what creative solutions can be brought up, especially with the privacy issue that was mentioned earlier between the different types of buildings, and what are some of the creative things that can be brought up with landscaping specifically to maybe help mitigate some of those privacy issues. So that's something that everybody didn't really have a sense of what exactly it would look like, but like the idea of exploring that option. Very, very supportive of commercial integration throughout the community, and specifically small businesses, right? And ensuring that there's lots of support for them to ensure their success.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anna, Martine, everybody in group 4. How about Beth and Stefan's group?
Hello, I'll be representing my rather diverse group. So we started by talking about how buildings can cast pretty dramatic shadows. So trying to place the buildings so that solarly they're not casting shadows on someone's yard or house. Or additionally, we can place those taller buildings along open spaces. So we also talked about how setbacks can help provide more trees in a neighborhood and including them. potentially all around the building. We think that the setback could be a great way to help transition buildings. So you can have tall buildings and then some sort of open space setback, and then the smaller buildings that are currently zoned not R3. And talked about how commercial is, everyone supports the commercial being added to the neighborhood or maintained in the neighborhood, but there are some parking pros and cons, and trying to figure out where to locate that so that it does not affect the residential parking. And then just one more thing is that we support using all the tools that we discussed today, and still support tall buildings, which will allow affordable units, just being very intentional about where they go.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Beth. Thank you to everybody in Group 5. And thank you all tonight for all of your input. I do have a few more final notes before you leave. Let me share my screen one more time. You guys are sick of staring at a screen, but this is almost over, I promise. So first of all, if you feel like you had more to say, or if you had a neighbor that couldn't make it, please feel free to log into our website. The URL is here. It's also on the flyer and the notice that you may have received. So this will take you to our city page, and there's a link for the online workshop right there in the middle of the city page, which will take you to your opportunity to provide more comments on all of these topics. Right now, the only neighborhood that's up on that page is the Montaloma neighborhood, which was the neighborhood that we had a workshop of last week. But in the next week or so, we'll have all of these materials for the Moffett Whisman neighborhood up, and you'll be able to provide additional comments that way. So next steps after this outreach will carry on through this outreach will carry on through the end of 2022. We'll develop options and return to the EPC and council for their review in early 2023. And we're expecting to adopt this project in late 2023 or early 2024. So thanks again. I will be available for about 5 or 6 more minutes if there are any quick questions that you want to ask before we go. And have a great night. Thank you again for your time this evening.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye,
Thank
Christine.
you all.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Hey, Eric.
Yeah, Bruce.
Good night.
Yeah,
Take
I
good
wanted to
care.
mention in our breakout that I was not representing MVCSP and Green Spaces MV, but we've submitted a lot of comments and letters and things. And
Yeah.
most of what we talked about tonight really did reflect what we've talked about in those letters and comments. So for what it's worth, just letting you know.
Okay, thank you for the heads up. Yes, Hala.
Yes, I would like to emphasize that I would really like to see a precise plan for Moffett area, including the residential area, before implementing any changes, updates to the zoning in there. I think that would be very beneficial to the residents of that area.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the comment. And as I said, the council has tasked us with bringing forward a study session probably in the next, I'm anticipating that it will certainly be in the next year, although it may not be, by the end of 2022. But we are going to bring forward a study session to the council to talk about options for a Moffett Boulevard precise plan.
Actually, one more question, if I may.
Of course.
Affordability, is that something that's being considered in this plan? I know the city requires 15% affordable housing for certain size developments, but unfortunately that's not enforced. It's not compulsory. Are there any changes in that policy? You know,
So the 15% is compulsory. One of the nuances of density bonus is that any bonus units that somebody gets as part of a density bonus there is no BMR requirement on. So a density bonus project will end up having fewer than 15% affordable units. However, from this point forward, there were a few projects that were still kind of pipelined in because they were under review during the time when we adopted our current BMR code. But from this point forward, the 15% requirement is compulsory. We are in the next couple of years going to be having a study session to look at our BMR code. Is it meeting all of our city goals? Are there any amendments that we need to do to update it and make it achieve more of our goals? We also have a broad range of 100% affordable projects that are in the pipeline that the city is actively working on to try to support affordability through the nonprofit sector.
that's great to hear that the 15% will be compulsory moving forward. That's great.
Right.
Thank you.
David and then Bruce.
Oh, I want to hear what Bruce has to say.
Okay,
Go ahead, Bruce.
Well, David will like this. I wanted to echo something that Partis brought up, which is we've got the 2020 map and the 2022 map, and it's unclear how much housing the 2022 map will provide compared with the 2020. And Tony told us that that was going to be looked at, but it hasn't been done yet. So just wanted to echo that point that Partis made.
Yeah, no, it hasn't been done yet. We would still need to do more detailed analysis. Right now, this is kind of very much a brainstorming session. I think if you remember when we did the outreach for the first time around, we didn't really have a number that it was going to produce. And then we presented it to council with a roughly 9,000 additional unit capacity number from the 2020 option. So the 2022 option would be less than that because it, wouldn't have sites going up to 6 stories, but we haven't done that analysis yet. Thanks for the question.
So my question is about residential parking programs. I don't know if you're familiar with the whole thing from Donald Shoup, where basically you want to sell those permits to the existing homeowners before you build the significant density, right? Like if you wait until after you've built the new density, then it's too late to sell the residential parking permits, and you get yourself into more of a mess. But if you sell those permits permanent, that permanent permits that the existing homeowners can themselves sell or keep or give to their heirs or whatever, it gets them invested in the value of density. But if we wait until we built the R3, there'll be so many units you won't be able to sell. Like there will no longer be enough capacity on the streets for all those residential parking permits, and then you won't be able to implement the program. You won't be able to have the paid component that covers the rest of the costs and raises money and all that stuff. So when is the right time to talk about adding that? Like, can that be something that's part of the R3 program? Should I have been bringing that up more strenuously here?
So you make an excellent point. I think there's an economic side to your point. There's also a political side to your point, which is
you want people to support it.
Yeah. So I think also you can potentially create capacity on the streets by encouraging people to use their private garages, for example, and things like that. Show where there is there's additional capacity. So there's a lot of good points. I think we are the Public Works Department is working on the residential permit parking program. I don't have a whole lot of direct knowledge.
That's Old Mountain View, though, right?
Well, the program is citywide, and so any neighborhood can actually adopt an RPP. And
Sounds nice.
last I knew, there were modifications to the program in order to lower the threshold for neighborhoods to adopt a parking permit program. But I unfortunately don't know the status of all that, and I encourage you to look on the website at the RPPP materials on the website.
So like right now, Rex Manor could petition to have that?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Wow. As the vice president of the Rex Manor neighborhood association, I'm very excited. I suspect though that holding a referendum probably is maybe a bridge too far, because again, we're not seeing the massive development yet here, right? So it seems like what you're saying is that it's something where like the residents have to see, hey, this is coming, we better do this now before the new residents move in, which I mean, again, is super cutthroat and kind of ugly, but at the same time, it makes things work. So I want it to happen because I really want the paid parking in the places where they're high demand. Okay, that's terrific. Okay, so maybe that's something I'll remember next time in one of these meetings. If someone's worried about parking, I'll mention that. Hey, like if we're worried about this, we should implement the residential parking permit. It doesn't work the way I described. I have to read out, right? You're not sure whether it gives all the existing homeowners a permanent transferable permit.
I don't think so. That doesn't sound familiar to me.
Okay. Okay.
So I encourage you to look on the website at the details of the program on the website.
Okay. And if I wanted to work differently, I'd have to read it on the website. Maybe communities can have it implemented differently for their community. Maybe I've got to talk to council.
Yeah.
Something. Yeah. Okay.
But great points. Thanks. Christine.
It's Christine and Elsa. We just wanted to second and third really the call out for needing a precise plan for our area. Living where we do at 555 West Middlefield and the development that was just approved, we are frustrated that the precise plan wasn't done beforehand, and we just want to continue to advocate for that as well. So we appreciate Hala pointing that out.
Thank you. Well, thank you for seconding it. Again, stay tuned. There will be a study session in the next, within the next year. I don't know exactly when, but definitely within the next year.
All right. Thank you so much for everything tonight too. Take good care, everybody.
Thank you. All right, great. Well, David, did you have another question?
No, I just don't know how to lower my hand quick enough. That's the problem. I'm used to, you guys got to hold these in Google Meet. The one advantage it has is after you talk, it automatically lowers your hand.
Oh, okay.
I don't work on the Google Meet team. I work on the ads team. So I'm not.
Okay. Well, with that shout out, why don't we say good night and thank you again, everyone, for coming out tonight. Have a great evening.